So guys, what should we do for our next video essay? I think it should be something topical.
Halloween?
Yeah, maybe a franchise that people are really thinking about this time of year?
It's gotta be Halloween.
That's a great idea, Dan. Yeah, something horror-related would be really great. Maybe something that has a new reboot or sequel coming up.
Halloween!
So, the Wednesday Addams series?
Ugh.
On October 25th, 1978, a $300,000 horror movie premiered in Kansas. It would eventually gross almost $200 million adjusted for inflation and become an iconic landmark in film history, arguably defining what had, until then, been a nascent genre, the slasher.
Halloween's story is simplicity itself. It's good versus evil, innocent suburban America under siege from the scourge of the 70s, the serial killer. Its mute-masked maniac, Michael Myers, preyed upon a vulnerable type of victim that drive-in teenage moviegoers could all identify with, the babysitter, while being pursued by a harbinger of doom, his doctor.
The characters are archetypes. The premise is pure exploitation cinema. The execution of it, however, elevated the film to classic status. Tightly scripted by Deborah Hill and John Carpenter, artfully directed and scored by Carpenter with a razor-sharp focus on building unbearable tension, and captivatingly performed by a winning cast, Halloween set a standard that subsequent slashers struggled to emulate.
This was never more true than in the case of its many sequels. The film spawned one of America's biggest horror franchises in terms of box office, yielding 12 follow-ups and reboots, culminating in this year's Halloween Ends.
Some of them tried to recapture the elements that made the original so special. Others tried to build on or expand the original formula. One tried to turn the property into an anthology series. Their levels of success varied wildly. Some were a delectable treat, others were a detestable trek.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, where we peel back the layers of movies that did not resonate as hoped with audiences to try and understand why.
In this episode, we want to examine the Halloween movie franchise to figure out why we can't get a sequel to stick, and instead keep rebooting and rewriting the story.
We're going to focus on the one consistent element throughout the series, Michael Myers.
Halloween 3.
Okay, apart from Halloween 3.
Michael Myers is the quintessential horror movie villain. Like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger after him, he became a pop culture icon, inspiring fear and a desire to see more. But what makes him scary, and moreover, what makes him resonate with the audience?
Halloween emerged in what's been described as the golden age of serial murder. Recent high-profile cases like the Manson family, John Wayne Gacy, and the Zodiac had left white suburban America fearful of seemingly motiveless killers preying upon them in their homes. Myers embodied this fear perfectly. Known only as the Shape in the shooting script, he's devoid of personality. He never speaks and is almost always hidden behind a pale blank mask of nondescript human features.
Crucially, in the original movie, he has no apparent motives for his killings. Psychiatrically committed after killing his sister at the tender age of 6, Michael escapes 15 years later to murder seemingly random babysitters and their boyfriends in his hometown. There seems to be no hope of understanding him or protecting yourself from him. He's a faceless, inhuman evil in the shape of a man who could strike from anywhere in the shadows at any time.
Michael Myers
kill the boogeyman.
Is a force of nature as opposed to a human being.
Yeah.
He's evil.
Incarnate.
Michael is a metaphor for random violence, and thus he is not treated as a real character. He has no personality and no face because he is not a person. In Carpenter and Dean Cundey's eerie cinematography, he can appear anywhere effortlessly, with no hint of how he got there or how he disappeared unnoticed.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Adding to this mystique is the frequent use of point-of-view shots, seemingly filmed from Michael's perspective. This technique would become a staple of horror movie cinematography, and in this film served to keep the audience in a state of constant tension and uncertainty. He seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, human and not human. Our inability to see him made him scarier.
Sequels face the challenge of striking a balance between giving audiences more of what they liked in the original movie while also giving them something new, something they haven't seen before, something that expands on the world or the story or deepens their understanding of and connection with their favourite characters. It's hard to pull this off. When you do, you create a bona fide classic that rivals the original whilst being its own thing. Think Alien and Aliens. Plot-wise, they have the same story, and it reveals just enough new information about the heroine and her nemesis to pique our interest without undermining what made us like them before. So how did the Halloween sequels fare when faced with this challenge?
Before we dive into this franchise, currently consisting of 13 films, it may be helpful to review its primary story arcs and timelines. Due to several franchise reboots and reimaginings, the story and the fates of many of the characters can be challenging to keep straight.
The original timeline consists of the first 6 films, omitting Halloween 3, which does not have anything to do with Michael Myers and is on an island all by itself. This series introduced the Laurie is Michael's sister idea and continued the family ties with Laurie's daughter Jamie and her grandson, Stephen.
The H2O timeline keeps the first 2 films and removes 4 to 6, adding 2 new films in their place. Laurie is still Michael's sister, but is still alive and has a son rather than a daughter. She's running from her past, but ultimately faces her fear and destroys Michael in H2O, only for him to unceremoniously murder her at the start of its sequel, Halloween Resurrection. This movie also retcons Laurie killing Michael in H2O by saying she murdered an innocent man.
The zombie timeline. Rob Zombie essentially reboots and retells the entire story with his 2 films. These are modern, violent, gritty films that keep some of the characters in name only and go heavily into analysis of what makes a monster.
The 2018 timeline keeps only the original film and removes the family relationship theme. Laurie is depicted as a hypervigilant trauma survivor, and Michael is back to being a random killer.
There's no doubt that if a Halloween sequel is going to work, the most important variable is Michael Myers. While the sequels and reboots branch into very different directions, they all struggle to do 3 key things when it comes to Michael: define his motivation, depict him in a frightening way, and devise new methods for him to kill his victims.
It's all about family!
In the original Halloween movie, Michael Myers is killing seemingly at random, which is why he is so scary. He's unpredictable and killing purely for enjoyment. However, many of the Halloween sequels attempted to explain Michael's behavior, which either demystified or over-mystified him. This started as early as Halloween 2, with the revelation of a familial relationship between the hero and the villain. This was a popular twist in the early 80s, thanks to a certain film franchise.
I am your father.
But this works best when the twist creates a fascinating dynamic between the 2 characters, or reveals something about the hero. In The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker learns that his natural ability with the Force is inherited, and from someone who used it for evil. He's worried he'll turn out like his father. But what does it mean to find out that Laurie Strode is Michael's sister? Is she worried she'll turn out to be like him?
Not really. The franchise is fragmented into 4 different timelines for Laurie Strode, each with different sliding doors outcomes for her. 2 of them depict her becoming proactive in hunting Michael to kill him. In the latest trilogy, she's dedicated her life to doing it in a very unhealthy, Sarah Connor-like way. In the timeline established in Rob Zombie's remakes, Laurie is depicted as being on the verge of becoming a killer herself at the end of Halloween 2.
Halloween 4, one of my favourites of the sequels, expands the family theory by suggesting that all members of the Myers clan have inherited the killer gene. In it, Jamie Lloyd, Laura's daughter and Michael's niece, spends the majority of the movie as a vulnerable target of her uncle's murderous rampage. She's haunted by a mild intuitive connection with Michael and even dreams about him. But in a shocking twist finale, Jamie dons Myers' childhood clown costume and attempts to murder her own foster mum, much to Dr. Loomis's surprise.
Horror franchises struggle with giving characters new challenges and new foes because they're obligated to focus on the same villain. So one of the best ways to make a horror sequel fresh and interesting is to bring in new characters to mix things up. And while the family trope takes away much of Michael's menace, Jamie's character makes this installment less of a retread.
The familial connections didn't end in Halloween 4. When producer Mustafa Akkad asked Halloween 5 director Dominique Othenin-Giraud to come up with a hook or tease for the next film, the director asked,
"Does he have a brother?"
This led to the introduction of a mysterious man in black who helps the killer escape from prison to continue his homicidal rampage. So he's either a big fan of the Shape's activities or an accomplice to them. Michael's brother is clearly not a nice guy. Luckily, the makers of Halloween 6 abandoned this surprise sibling idea. Revealing one too many family connections can make your franchise look plain silly.
Leia's my sister.
But the family connection is stretched in a new and even more unbelievable way in Halloween 6, which focuses on Laurie's adopted family, the Strodes.
Tonight on The Strodes, Kara discovers why her new neighbor Tommy is watching her bedroom through binoculars.
One of the Strode kids seems to have the killer instinct, and he's not even a blood relative. It seems just sharing a bathroom with a member of the Myers family is enough to catch the slasher virus. Given that Halloween 6 is part 3 of the so-called Thorn trilogy, it's a shame they didn't let Jamie continue as a character longer than the first 10 minutes. Having her as the heroine instead of Kara Strode would have linked the trilogy better and made the family explanation for Michael's killer instinct more consistent.
But does any of this make Michael Myers scarier in the sequels? If anything, it dilutes his impact because he's no longer unique. His whole extended family is just a clown costume away from embarking on a bloodbath. It also takes away his eerie lack of a motive. Now he has one. He's trying to kill all his family members. When he discovers he has a new relative, it's enough to resurrect him from a coma in a fist-clenching rage with a new desire to kill. Instead of the inscrutable killer who could strike any of us, he's just the guy with the sister fixation. The subtext is no longer, there is an undefinable and inescapable darkness inside all our safe homes that can destroy us. And instead, it's, this guy really has some deep issues with his family. Essentially, all you have to do is stay away from Laurie Strode on Halloween night, and you're going to be just fine.
The filmmakers tried everything they could to make the family connection mean something in 3 timelines. The Thorn trilogy timeline from Halloweens 2 to 6, the H2O timeline which pretended 4 to 6 hadn't happened, and the Rob Zombie remake duo which started all over again. But they must have realised it was a thematic dead end because they ditched it almost immediately in the newest timeline.
Wasn't it her brother who cold-blooded mutilated all those teenagers?
No, that's just a bit that some people made up to make him feel better, I think.
Reducing Michael's motivation to sibling rivalry or a domestic spat
Sister.
just makes him easier to understand.
Is that it?
Safer. It doesn't make him scary.
I'm glad they ditched this oversimplified explanation of Michael's behavior.
Yes, I much prefer the mystery. You can never go wrong with a mystical aspect to your character.
Well... Remember, the director of Halloween 5 introduced a mysterious man in black who could be Michael Myers' brother. Well, the makers of Halloween 6 decided that was a lame idea, so instead of his brother, he became the head of a secret cult worshipping the Celtic festival of...
Samhain.
Nope.
Samhain.
Not even close, Paul Stephen Rudd. It's pronounced more like Samhain.
The Festival of Samhain.
The ancient Celtic harvest festival thought to have influenced Halloween traditions.
The first mention of Samhain came in Halloween 2, when Loomis finds that Michael has scrawled it in blood on a chalkboard.
It means the Lord of the Dead. The end of summer.
But it's just a throwaway creepy reference to Halloween. It suggests Michael is obsessed with the holiday, but it doesn't explain why, so it kind of maintains the mystery. Nothing more is made of it until you get to Halloween 6, where, oh boy, they go all in.
The Curse of Michael Myers creates a whole mythology for the character. It's not really fair to call 4, 5, and 6 the Thorn trilogy, because 6 goes off on its own screwy tangent, drawing inspiration from a symbol that's revealed to be tattooed on Michael's wrist in 5.
The story is that a human sacrifice has to be made, usually each year, to appease the gods or evil ones or whatever, to ensure prosperity for the community. It's usually a young virgin girl, of course, but sometimes it's depicted as children or outsiders. It's not always relatives. This is a well-established trope seen throughout literature, film, and television.
Halloween 6 uses this mythology to present Michael as the product of a Celtic cult bent on creating the ultimate evil. In the theatrical cut, it's through some sort of genetic manipulation or Bene Gesserit-style selective breeding, and ends with an unclear medical procedure that gets interrupted before we find out what the secret society is doing. But in the producer's alternate cut of the film, Michael is just an unwitting instrument of the cult, driven by magic and astrological alignments, ending with a twisted religious ceremony intent on the aforementioned human sacrifice. Originally, the whole town of Haddonfield was in on the conspiracy, like in Hot Fuzz, but the producers scaled it back to just the staff of Smith's Grove Sanatorium for budgetary reasons.
Taking the plot in this direction is a huge departure from the original film's narrative and the metaphor for faceless violence that was at its core. And while we love to see sequels tell a new type of story and explore new ideas, sequels should always respect the original story and not rewrite it after the fact.
It's a new direction for the series for sure, and it's fun to see Paul Rudd in an early role as grown-up Tommy Doyle. One of the kids Laurie was babysitting in the original film. He's convinced that there's a reason for Michael's behavior.
Some method behind Michael's madness.
It's all runes and constellations and mysticism, but does this make Michael more frightening?
I don't think so. He's sidelined like Jamie and reduced to being a sort of henchman for the Machiavellian cult leader, kind of like Jaws in the 70s Bond movies or Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi. And like Vader, he's also under threat of being replaced by a younger model as the cult grooms Kara's son Danny to graduate from experimentally prodding adults with knives into a full-blown killer.
Kill for him.
It all makes Michael seem irrelevant and kind of pathetic.
Even worse, the producer's cut of 6 presents Michael as an incestuous rapist and the father of Jamie's child. Is this what they call humanizing his character? Yuck! The theatrical cut wisely omits this idea.
What a relief. Who wants to watch a seedy, sexually depraved backstory for their favorite horror icon?
So, Rob Zombie's remakes. The H2O timeline attempted to ride the wave of self-aware postmodern slashers initiated by Wes Craven's Scream in 1996. H2O's script even had input from Scream writer-producer Kevin Williamson. The 90s were also the era of pop psychology. Star Trek even had a counselor on the bridge. Halloween Resurrection toys with the idea of adopting a pop psychology approach to Michael Myers, suggesting he was an abused child.
Hey, you think they kept him down here?
This whole place looks like some sort of sadistic playpen.
But this idea is mockingly subverted when all of the evidence of his sadistic childhood is revealed to be a bunch of props made in Taiwan and inserted for the sake of a reality TV show.
Okay, so none of this shit is real, right?
America don't like reality.
This keeps Michael shrouded in mystery. He's not evil because he's the product of a broken home. He's just evil, and I think he's pretty scary in Resurrection. Well, except when he's being kung fu kicked out of a window by Busta Rhymes.
This didn't stop Rob Zombie from giving us Michael, the abused child from a broken home, in his 2007 reboot of the franchise. A full half hour is devoted to exploring Michael's abusive childhood, ostensibly covering the same events John Carpenter managed to get through in a single 5-minute point-of-view shot in his original. Zombie toys with the idea of nature versus nurture in making a monster, and it's unclear if Michael is exhibiting this behavior because he is abused, or if the abuse only enhances his evil, which comes from within. In this iteration, Michael bears many of the hallmarks seen in serial killers as children, including isolation, rebelliousness, and animal cruelty. In this version, you do feel kind of sorry for Michael in his abusive home and school, and he seems almost justified in killing many of his first victims.
Unlike the randomness of the killings in the first film, Zombies Michael Myers seems to be motivated by vengeance and, in his second installment, a strange idea of uniting his family in death to achieve some kind of peace. This is depicted through the recurring image in his mind of his dead mother with a white horse, which Laurie also sees by the end. Zombie wanted these scenes to help audiences understand Michael's perspective.
That's why I thought it would be interesting to get a glimpse into the way Michael perceives the world.
But is it scary to know that Michael sees the world as a Bonnie Tyler music video?
Not at all. Zombies films suggest that Michael has some kind of inherited madness, and that, at least on some level, his killings are justified.
We've completely recreated the legend of Michael Myers. He's not the boogeyman in the shadows. He's a living, breathing person.
But that doesn't make him threatening. It just makes him sad.
I always felt sympathy for Michael, for Laurie, for everyone. It's just a tragic event.
While working on Halloween Resurrection, director Rick Rosenthal wrestled with the same issue.
There's always a tricky question of, do you humanize the demon? Do you humanize the villain? Do you humanize the boogeyman? And if you do, can it still be scary? And we never quite resolved that issue.
Seeing the world through Michael's eyes definitely demystifies him, and you could argue the same can be said for seeing him at all.
In the original, Michael feels as though he is everywhere and nowhere. We see what we imagine he is seeing, stalking victims from a distance while they remain mostly unaware of his menacing presence. Only those characters who have a heightened awareness feel that prickling on the back of their necks as they can feel someone is watching them. This operates the same way that an actual stalker does, in that because you don't see them, it feels like they're everywhere all the time. You're always in a state of fear.
One of the ways Carpenter and cinematographer Dean Cundey achieve this is by carefully orchestrating shots in which Michael appears and disappears in the deep background, usually with a clueless character in the foreground, without you ever seeing him move into or out of position. He's either there,
Oh, is this one of your cheap trips?
or not there. It creates tension because the audience is aware of a threat and the character isn't. They're vulnerable. It also gives Michael that semi-supernatural looming presence. He could be anywhere without warning.
Some of the sequels recreate this quite well. For example, in the scene in Halloween 6 where Michael kills Deborah Strode, includes shots where he appears behind her, sometimes out of focus, but they end less subtly by having the character sense something and whip around to see nothing. But many of them either don't use this technique at all, or they try and get it wrong. H20 makes the mistake of showing him moving into position rather than having this happen off screen.
Let me just hit my mark here. There you go. That'll be creepy next time she looks.
It feels like Michael's behind-the-scenes documentary showing how he weaves his magic.
Another method of creating tension is through those point-of-view stalking shots. The first Halloween is famous for its opening shot, a killer's eye view on the murder of Judith Myers in what appears to be a single take. It's actually several takes fairly seamlessly glued together, but as cinematographer Dean Cundey explains, it's not just the length of the shot that makes it so effective, it's the eerie, floating quality.
John wanted to really exploit it as a way of moving the camera in a way that we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, handheld wasn't what he was after.
No, because it's too jerky, too obvious that it's being carried by a person. This gives you more of a floating sensation. So we would use it to track along with people, but then also as a point of view of the shape to create sort of the suspense and tension.
Halloween cinematic ancestors, such as Black Christmas, had used point-of-view shots to represent the killer before, but they tended to be shaky cam, alienating and somewhat nauseating the viewer. This was effortlessly smooth, which makes sense when you remember that Michael is not a person, he's a force.
This even influenced Nick Castle's performance of The Shape.
I think that John was serious about wanting someone who didn't lurch around, who moved well, who glided along, and you certainly had that quality.
Yeah,
and it's no small thing, because later movies, sequels, people tended to hire stuntmen, and most of them sort of lurch around.
Yeah, they walk as if they're menacing, as opposed to being evil.
Which I am.
Yeah,
an evil dancer.
Yeah, exactly.
Myers isn't presented as a raving, flailing lunatic running after his victims. He's determined and single-minded, and has no need to rush. He knows he'll get his victim in the end. Some of the sequel's directors tried to inject more character into The Shape's performance, like Dwight H. Little in Halloween 4.
I wanted what we do see of the eyes and what we do see of the body language to be, in a sense, human, but also that there's a consciousness behind it. And I wanted to make sure that we tried to take the robot out of Michael. I directed him as if he were an actor without a mask.
But the film makes the mistake of not showing Michael at all for a long time. And when we do see him, his mask is too white and he's shown more in wide shots, moving agonizingly slow. It looks farcical at times.
Most of the sequels tended not to use the POV shots that made the original so unsettling, especially once you get beyond Halloween's 5 and 6. They prefer to show Michael on screen for increasing amounts of time. In some cases, he just seems to be hanging out. Fans were quick to point this out. As early as Halloween 2, in a letter to Fangoria in February 1982, one reader complained that Rick Rosenthal showed Michael too much. In the first one, he appears and disappears without warning. In the new one, there is shot after shot of him wandering around, especially in the hospital. He took away greatly from his mystique. Tommy Lee Wallace, the editor and production designer on the original film, agrees.
The rules are simple, is don't get too familiar with the bad guy, with the monster. Keep it in shadow, use POVs instead of constantly looking at it and seeing it, demystifying it.
Although it kick-started the slasher genre that reigned through the late 70s and early 80s, Halloween is surprisingly bloodless.
One of the impressive things about this movie is how effective it is, and we made a very conscious effort to not use blood.
Apart from the famous opening shot, Michael isn't shown killing anyone until 53 minutes into the film, and the kills are slow and agonizing, with almost no blood and more emphasis on the victim's terror, and Michael's disturbing fascination with the results of his work.
By the time Halloween 2 arrived in 1981, the slasher genre had evolved. Audiences expected kills with elaborate and explicit gore scenes, thanks to the groundbreaking makeup effects work of Tom Savini on Friday the 13th. Rick Rosenthal hadn't included much gore in his original cut of the first Halloween sequel, but writer-producer John Carpenter found the end result too tame for contemporary audiences. He said it wasn't even as scary as an episode of the popular medical drama Quincy.
This is gruesome. This is like a cable crime. We're network.
Yeah, no one dies on our show.
Right. Let's face it, on our darkest day, we're Scooby-Doo.
Maybe Quincy.
Maybe Quincy.
Afraid of disappointing fans, he shot and added gruesome deaths. But apart from a lengthy and upsetting drowning scene, most of the kills are quick, more like stingers, without building much tension.
This trend continued in later sequels with some notable exceptions. Halloween 4 tends to focus on showing the aftermath of Michael's rampages, such as the diner and the police station. Some characters disappear during the siege in the house, only for their bodies to be discovered later. We don't see all of the kills, but by Halloween 6, the kills were so fast it became ridiculous, verging on the black humor that infused the later sequels in the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
Rob Zombie's remakes did a complete 180 on this while going for a much harder tone. For example, his Halloween 2 features a tearful death scene between Annie and Laurie. The director thinks this elevates the film above the conventions of the genre.
You really feel as if her friend is dying, and you really feel like she dies. It's not just like fun slasher movie crap.
But I think interrupting the action-packed finale of a horror film with an emotionally brutal scene alienates the audience. It feels like an exploitative intrusion into raw personal tragedy rather than an exciting roller coaster ride.
The new Halloween trilogy is trying to strike a difficult balance between these two extremes. In the first entry, Michael brutally kills a child on screen, a shocking first for him. The murders tend to be hands-on, violent and gritty, focusing on realistic depictions of injury and suffering, rather than grand guignol special effects showpieces. Unfortunately, a subconsciously misogynistic pattern emerges. Women tend to be dragged and terrorized on screen for a while before being stabbed multiple times, whilst men are often killed off screen and we only see the result. But credibility goes out the window in the third act when Michael stomps a man's head flat and turns a policeman's head into a jack-o'-lantern in 5 minutes. He clearly didn't miss leg day in the gym or crafting class whilst at Smith's Grove.
When it comes to depicting violence and gore in the sequels, it's difficult to satisfy changing audience expectations while staying true to what made the original film so effective. The best of them managed to up the ante and challenge the audience without alienating or repulsing them.
Sequels are always difficult to do well, and horror sequels present even more challenges. The villain is often the only constant, and this means that the audience walks in knowing exactly what the protagonist is going to face, even if they do not. Changing genres is also not really an option, as you're locked into the horror category. With this in mind, it's nearly impossible to not fuck with the formula and still add new conflict and stakes, because we already know walking in what the conflict will be.
To further complicate things, it's nearly impossible to have multiple sequels without demystifying or over-explaining the monster. If the monster's like Freddy Krueger, that may be okay. He has a big personality and some more places to go. But if your monster is silent and his menace comes only from his brutality, you're left with engaging the audience with new characters and new kill techniques.
Halloween is one of the few horror franchises where the final girl keeps appearing throughout the series, even if a few reboots and retcons are needed to accomplish this. This makes it almost impossible to increase the stakes and add new conflict. It's one of the reasons why the Terminator franchise has tried to make Terminator 3 5 times.
The single most glaring problem with most of the Halloween sequels is that they feel an inherent need to explore and explain why Michael kills. Whether it's because of familial hatred, cults, child abuse, or genetics, it always leaves the audience feeling like, oh, so it's just that. Okay.
Is that it?
The 2018 timeline of films tries to rectify this by removing the family link and not really explaining Michael's motivations. While this is a step in the right direction, what remains is very self-aware and bordering on self-referential, with many Easter eggs thrown in for the fans. For example, characters from the original making cameos. It feels like we've run out of new stories to tell here.
Yep. Maybe Halloween Ends will end the franchise after all.
Some people think it shouldn't have started.
Clearly, you had no future thought for this.
No.
There was no quadruple in your head.
No, I still feel this didn't need to have a sequel.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video essay, why not check out our podcast at movieoubliette.com, where we review sci-fi, fantasy and horror films that most people have mercifully forgotten. And check out Retro Blasting on YouTube, the premier video channel specializing in humorous analysis and deconstruction of 1980s vintage toys and classic cartoons.